I had an experience at this location, similar to the gentleman who shared his story, so I'd like to share mine as well. One evening, out of the blue, my friend told me about this haunted track just outside that small Saskatchewan town, located in Canada. We decided to take the several-hour trip just for fun, just to see it. My friend, who knew about it, had already been there several times, and told us exciting but scary stories about it. 2 carloads of us made that trip that wintry night. We drove our vehicles down the track, past some no trespassing barricades, and parked. We got out to look. So to speak, we saw the light. This bright light, similar to a single headlight, slowly moving towards us. We then noticed it would split in 2, move fast, slow down, merge back into one, and repeat at fast rates. Freaked out, we ran back into the cars to leave, to notice the one larger car got stuck in the snow. We tried to get out. The longer and harder we tried, the brighter the light got. We couldn't move the vehicle away from the light because of the snow, but the guys figured we could move it forward, towards the light, unfortunately. Myself and another girl slowly walked towards the light to see if there was a clearing so we could turn around. When we did this, the light seemed to fade away. We walked quite a ways down, then decided to go back to the cars. We turned our backs to the light, which was at this time quite a ways away. You just have to look back, and after a few steps, we did. The light instantly grew in intensity and jumped what was like 50 to 70 feet towards us and was right behind us. We ran to the cars. It followed just as fast. Something, it wasn't the snow, kept making me trip over and over again, hurting my foot even more each time. I was on the verge of tears. Eventually, somehow, we got back into the cars, managed to get turned around, and started heading back. Then the car in front of us got stuck. The light moved up the road with us, but this time, maintained a bit of a distance. We got this car unstuck with less trouble than the first, and proceeded a few meters more when we came back to the barricade. I don't know how we got past it at first. It seemed impossible to get back. Big pieces of metal in the middle of the path, ditch with trees on the side. Maybe just enough to get a car through, if there was light. One of the girls got on top of the pile with a flashlight to show where the edge of that was. I got in the ditch to show where the edge of it was, turned on the headlights, and the most absurd thing happened. The spotlight went crazy, fast, unpredictable movements, sudden duplications, merges, etc. Then little red lights surrounded it as it turned into one huge glowing white light. Then the huge light went out, gone, instantly. The red lights remained, and they flew towards us at high speeds. I tried to get myself out of the ditch and run to the car, but my foot felt as if it was being pulled back by someone. I yelled at the top of my lungs for help, but everyone else was spooked by the red lights, and they were running. More resistance was felt to my ankle, and I looked back at it, and noticed the red little lights now, about a meter from me. I yelled at them to leave me alone, and for my friends to help. All of a sudden, I was released from its stranglehold. I then proceeded to leap from the ditch and ran as fast as I could. I got up and ran as fast as I could to jump in the car. We left and got away from those tracks. I know I yelled. The scary thing was, I asked my friends why they didn't help me get out of the ditch. They said they didn't hear me yell at all for anything. I know I did. Did the ghost take away my voice then and there? Discussing this event afterwards with the group, we concluded I had the scariest experience of the 8 or so of us who took the trip. Why? They aren't sure, but I think I know. I was the one who didn't believe any of it would happen. The ghost had to prove me wrong. They did. Trust me. Believe. They are out there, and you don't want them to have to prove it to you. Every time I tell this story to anyone, even typing it, my body stiffens up like I did that night. I feel a cold sweat, and every shadow scares me. It scared me to tears that night. I returned another time with other friends. They all believed at first, so they ventured out down the path, ran back within seconds, scared out of their wits. I got as far as 5 steps from the car when I jumped back in and locked the doors. Something felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I couldn't even look down the path. I traveled 4 hours. Didn't even look again, just to travel another 4 hours back home. Over 35 years ago, in our farm neighborhood, there was a farm where an old woman lived alone. It was said around the neighborhood that the old lady was a witch. I don't know if she actually was a witch, but she was pretty scary looking. She wore long dresses and always had a scarf tied over her head. She walked with a cane and was kind of stooped over looking. She didn't own a car, and we would see her walking up and down the roads, picking up cans and bottles, which I guess she sold. We would pass her in the mornings on the school bus, and whenever the bus went by her, all the kids would quiet down and sit silently in their seats. We wouldn't admit it, but we were scared of her. As I said, she lived on a farm. She did not farm the land, but rather cash rented her ground to another farmer. The land was a mix of ridgeland and rich bottom ground, prime farmland. There was a nice large woods which held an abundance of wildlife. The farmstead itself consisted of a large 2-story farmhouse, 2 barns, and a spring house. Large old pines surrounded the house. It actually was kind of a pretty farm. In 1963, the old lady died alone, and her land was bought by a neighbor in a share of sale. The neighbor was never successful in finding a tenant for the house. It seemed that nobody would live there very long. Then, in 1966, the house and all the outbuildings burned to the ground. The ensuing investigation didn't ever turn up much, but to this day, the rubble of the fires is still there, and the site is slowly going back to nature. Just a large pine still mark where the farm stood. Along came 1967, and for me, life changed. Graduation, the Marines, and Vietnam. Thoughts of witchy-looking old ladies were the furthest from my mind. Presently, after 2 tours, I returned to the good old USA, and for a while, traveled around, seeing the country. Soon, I became homesick and moved back home to Indiana. Having lived in the bush for a couple of years, I guess I had a hard time adjusting to life among people, so I would spend a lot of time in the woods hunting, or just sitting alone, in the quiet. Upon my return home, I asked the owner of the old witch farm if I could hunt on the ground he owned. He responded affirmative, as the ground was no longer good for farming. It seemed that after a couple of years after the old woman died, springs burst forth out of the hillsides in the farm and saturated the bottom ground, ultimately turning the farm into a marsh. Today, you can slog through the marsh and find the tops of fence posts sticking out of the ground for about 10 to 12 inches. Fence wire is still attached to the post, disappearing into the ground. Now, I started hunting on this ground, but I was always uncomfortable while I was there. I constantly felt as if I were being watched. It was kind of creepy. You could just feel something unnatural was there with you. However, having survived the NVA, I was not afraid of any creepy Indiana woodland. One rainy night, in the late 1970s, I decided to go fox hunting. I left my uncle's home and ventured out in the woods with a light, a fox call, and a shotgun. I knew the best hunting would come in the field behind the old witch's woman's farm stand, so I crossed the creek and went up the ridge to the old farm. I set up and began to use my fox call. I was not afraid. I'd learned long ago not to let my mind get the better of me. After a while, I called in a gray fox, but I was not able to get a good shot at him, so I held my fire. It was very quiet, just the sound of the rain falling. Now, I need to explain that when fox hunting, a call is used to call in the fox, and a powerful light with a red or amber lens cover is used to shine or reflect the fox's eyes, revealing the animal's position. This is a common method used by hunters everywhere. After I was convinced that the first fox I called in was not going to present a shot, I resumed calling. After several minutes, it seemed that I was hearing a noise coming from the old farmstead area. I shined my light in the direction of the pile of rubble that had once been the farm buildings, and suddenly I realized that the light was reflecting back a pair of eyes that seemed to be 8 to 10 feet off the ground. Okay, no need to panic. Probably a raccoon up in a small tree, trying to get a better view of an animal that was in distress, a noise my call makes. Regardless of what it was, this incident spooked me, and I decided to leave. I blew my cover and removed the red lens cover from the hunting light and turned it into the direction of the elevated eyes. Now, an animal's eyes will reflect red in light, but normally reflect with a greenish tint in white light. However, the eyes of a possum will still reflect with a reddish tint. The eyes that were being reflected in my light stayed red. No big deal, just a possum. I gathered my gear and started across the field for the wooded slope to go home. Turning my light in the direction of the red reflecting eyes, they were still there, unmoving, but closer. Now, any animal whose eyes are being reflected in light will eventually move their head, causing a momentary break in the reflection. These eyes were unblinking, unmoving, except they appeared to be following me towards the woods. The scariest thing was the fact that the eyes were still about 10 feet off the ground. It was then I realized that there were no trees in the field for an animal to be in, and no Indiana owls can hover like a Harrier jet. Suddenly, this battle-tested Marine panicked and started double timing towards the woods. I found the footpath that went down to the creek crossing and started down it. After going about 40 meters into the woods, I stopped dead in my tracks. I was suddenly paralyzed with fear. I knew if I turned around that the pursuing eyeshine would be behind me. Mustering my courage, I slowly turned, shotgun at the ready, and as sure as hell, the reflection was there at the tree line, still about 10 feet off the ground. In the powerful beam of my hunting light, I should be able to see the body of whatever was following me, but all I could see were the eyes, staring, almost seeming to glow red. I was toying with the idea of shooting at what I was now sure was an apparition, but a low guttural sound, which came from the same location of the eyes, convinced me that this was not a good idea. I was overwhelmed with the feeling to get the hell out of here, so finding the feeling in my legs, I broke and ran like I never had before. I did not even use the stepping stones at the creek crossing. I just splashed through the water. I continued my pace through the scrub timber until I finally found safety in my uncle's farmyard. At this time, I heard a cry coming from the timber that I cannot duplicate or describe accurately, but it had a mocking quality to it. What did I see in those woods that night? I don't know. It wasn't anything indigenous to the Indiana woods. It was something that scared the hell out of me more than an NVA B-40 rocket ever did. I know that I will never go into the woods again at night. This incident happened over 20 years ago, but I can't shake the image from my mind. I was reading the many accounts of ghost hauntings and appearances, and I thought I should share mine. My senior year, my sister, my friend Mindy, George, Joey, and myself decided to go and search for ghosts in a place that is known for many ghost hauntings. I'm from San Antonio, and some of you may be familiar with the tracks school bus crash that killed several children and bus driver in the surrounding Espada Park. On the way to the tracks, there's a cemetery about a couple of blocks off the main street that leads you to the tracks. It was about 11:30 at night, and we heard about the statue of the Virgin Mary, that if you stare at her long enough, she starts to rock back and forth. This whole area is known for many ghost sightings because it is also a battlefield. The statue is located in the cemetery, near the small road that leads into the cemetery. The cemetery has a gate surrounding it and a chained entrance. Well, anyway, we parked outside the fence and sat in silence to see if this was true. Sure enough, slowly at first, the statue started rocking. She sits with her head bowed and is holding her arms as if she is carrying a baby. To our surprise, the statue started throwing her head back. We started freaking out, but weren't too scared, because we had seen a ghost about 15 minutes ago, but that's another story. We sat there, and my friend noticed that the gate was completely open. I don't know how we would have missed an observation like that, since we have to pass the entrance to get to the park outside the gate to see the statue. We all decided to go in and get a better look. We were being stupid and just weren't scared enough, I guess. Slowly, George began driving, and as we kept getting closer to the statue, the harder she would rock. When we got to where we were aligned with the statue, about 10 feet, the most horrifying thing happened. The statue lifted her head and stared at us, but with no eyes and no face. It was completely black, and what made everything worse was that as soon as she looked at us, the car shut off entirely. We were in hysterics, screaming as if we were being murdered. Even George and Joey, two 18-year-old men, were screaming like girls. The car was a year old and had no problems with it. George continuously tried restarting the car, and it just would not turn on. The rest of us are looking away from the statue, and I was praying to God to start the car. Finally, what felt like an eternity, it started, and we hauled ass out of the cemetery and took a right out of the entrance, which leads us further away from the main road towards the tracks. We were in shock and decided to skip going to the tracks and go home and pray. When we got home, I noticed the TV was on and the news was blaring. It was announced that an earthquake had just hit the San Antonio area. I guess that explains what happened at the cemetery, even though I swear it was paranormal. I'm not even entirely sure what happened that night exactly, but I know it terrified me. But how do you explain the black eyes? How do you explain everything else? Maybe it was a paranormal earthquake, if that even makes sense. You know how I was talking about the ghost from earlier that I said I wouldn't mention? Well, I guess I should mention it now. A few minutes before we were heading up to the cemetery to see the statue, we saw this old guy out in the fields, just digging. As we drove by with our headlights on, we flashed towards the guy. He looked up at us and looked absolutely frightened. Either that or angry. It was hard to tell. But as he was looking up, his eyes were black. Not only that, but his eyes were so black that they were reflecting off of the car. I'm not even sure if that makes sense, but that's what we saw. We ended up driving past that area, and that's when we went into the cemetery. Now, you may dispute this and may be skeptical about what happened, but I'm telling you, honest to God, it really did happen. I know a lot of people say that, but I swear on my life that it did. Every time I pass by that cemetery, I can't help but think of what happened that night. I don't know if I'm ready to see that thing again, once it decides to appear. But I'll tell you what, whenever someone tells me a ghost story, I'll listen and believe. We moved into a house that was about 100 years old and had not been lived in for about 20. The rumor around town was that it was haunted. I did not believe this, even though I had grown up with people that had spent nights in the house and said that they experienced it firsthand. So we moved into the house when my children were ages 5 and 8 years old. The first night in the house, I was very nervous. I could not go to sleep. When I did almost fall asleep, I heard a man's voice in my head. I know this sounds very strange, but it was like someone else's thought was in my head, and it said a man's name. I can't remember the name, only that it started with a B. We finally settled in. The girls complained of doors locking them in rooms. We had gone out of town for the weekend. My youngest daughter got a virus. When we got home, she went to bed. About 5:30 a.m., I heard what I thought was one of my children calling out for me. When I checked in on them, they were sound asleep, not even stirring. I went from my youngest daughter's room into the hall to go to my room, and I saw what I thought were car lights reflecting in my window on the stair landing. But as I watched, the lights were bobbing up and down, independent of each other. They went down the steps, turned at the landing, and continued down the steps until they disappeared through a door. Another time, at about 5:30 a.m. again, I was awakened by someone touching my leg. I thought it was one of my children, but nobody was there. I also experienced the man's voice in my head one more time. Near Halloween of the same year, I was in the car with my children when my 5-year-old complained that she always felt that someone was watching her when she was in bed. This scared me. It was time to get out. We bought a brand new house and moved out. When we had moved into the old house, I had 2 cats. They were so scared in the old house that they didn't come out from under the couch for a week. I thought this was a reaction from moving. When we moved into the new house, they were at home right away. I feel that they sensed something. After we moved out, my mother-in-law confided that she had an experience in the house while getting my children off to school. It was a foggy morning and not yet light out. She heard someone come in the house. She walked into the dining room and could see someone in what was called the parlor. She thought it was my mother, who liked to get up early and walk every morning for exercise. When she spoke my mother's name, the presence went up the steps. She thought my mother had gone up to check on the children. When she never came down, my mother-in-law went up looking for her, and no one was there. She became concerned and called my mother to make sure she was all right. My mother confirmed her calling. She said she wondered why she called so early for no apparent reason. My husband also experienced hearing what he thought was the children calling out for him, and they were asleep. For about 6 months after this, I had nightmares about the house. I hope I never experience this again. But I'm not like the ending of the story. I hope you experience this outro again and again, and I hope you get these videos again and again, and I hope you comment, I hope you like, I hope you subscribe, and share this video to all the channels in the world, and say, hey, this channel's better than... Actually, don't do that, that's me, don't do that. Don't ever say that my channel's better than anyone else's to another person's channel, because that's just straight up idiotic. I would never condone that. Okay guys, but beside my obvious over theatrical way of speaking, thank you so much again, seriously, for tuning in and sharing, liking, and just being there for me when I need you the most, which is every time, because I love talking to you guys. But seriously guys, thank you so much. There's nothing else I really want to say other than I'm a weirdo, and I've been a weirdo since 1984. That's actually not when I was born. I was actually born a little later than that, but you guys know what I mean. When I mess up something, I don't like to edit things, and I don't like to actually, make myself look out to be perfect. So, if you can get past my ramblings, if you can get past, like, me actually sounding like an incoherent mother effer, then I won't do that, I guess. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. Anyways, with all my annoyances aside, I hope you really enjoyed the video, like I said, and, I'll see you in the next video, guys. That's all I really have to say. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. I have to see you in the next video. If God is my witness, I will see you in the next video. Maybe not literally, but maybe I'll hear you in the next video. Well, I can't do that either. Oh, man. Okay, guys, bye.